I forgot that she like pushes herself off of his face.
Who needs a sugar push when you can have a face break? Welcome to another zany episode of Nerdy West Coast Swing, where the anchors are out of this world and the points don't matter. We are here to help you train your eye so you can learn faster and dance better. I'm Cassie Winter.
I'm Alicia Marshall. If you're wondering who are we to be analyzing these pros, Cassie and I both have extensive training and experience in both solo and partner dances. She has about 21 years. I have about 23. We're not here to judge or put our opinion in on things, really. We're mostly just here to look at what's happening between two people. We like to keep it science-based.
Tonight's episode is on masculine versus feminine styling, regardless of role. We're going to be looking at 3 different videos tonight. And before we get into the first one, just want to give a tiny spiel. We understand that this is gendered language. We'll use the words masculine and feminine, but that in no way means we're saying that is in reference to biological sex male, biological sex female. We're just talking about how masculine movement tends to be more staccato and have more power and strength behind it, whereas feminine movement tends to be softer, rounded, and in particular, West Coast Swing have more hip movement and to have more of a legato timing. And why we want to focus on regardless of role is really, it's up to you how you want to look as a dancer, because this is about picking and choosing what movements you like to see and you would like to do and recreate in your own body. Mm-hmm. So, soapbox over. Our first video tonight is of Marina and Pavel from Russia. I am obsessed with this video, have been ever since Alicia showed it to me last year. Does everyone remember 2019? It did exist at one point.
When we could be around other people.
Yeah. Anyways, I'm going to drop the link in the chat. Go ahead and watch the whole thing and then come back and we will get to the analyzing. To the screen share. So the first thing we wanted to highlight tonight is this opening, because Pavel does this really strong side together at the very beginning, which has a lot of strength to it and power to it. And confidence also in his posture. And then immediately afterwards, Marina, first of all, realizes what song it is. That's what her face is doing. She's like, oh dear, oh dear, this is what's happening. But then she takes her time and does something very femininely sexual and uses her hips. So like right off the bat, we can already tell that like Pavel is more masculine and Marina is more feminine in their styling. Mm-hmm. And then we move on to this dip. And I wanted to highlight first how Pavel is not leading with his head. He waits to turn and look at her very sharply. And that's one thing that can read as masculine, regardless of who's dancing it, a really strong head turn and look. But additionally, there's this, oh man, I'm gonna not go into feminist critique of culture right now, but I feel like it's the whole like the male gaze thing, because he is very much looking at her. The whole room is looking at her.
Yeah.
There's something also very masculine about that. Mm-hmm. And Marina is like, yeah, you're all looking at me. Hell yeah. But I love her hand styling, where she's kind of broken at the wrists. Mm-hmm. It's a very feminine styling.
Yes, she has very ballet hand, where she has one finger lower than the others, which makes it more feminine. It makes it softer looking than if you have your hand all together.
So this is an extremely sexual part of the dance, and it's almost, I don't know if she's being ironic, but this pelvic thrust is very feminine, the way she dances it. Mm-hmm. And it's not vulgar in any way. It's just really sexy. Mm-hmm. But like if you were to imagine that exact same movement on Pavel, Might be a little awkward.
Yeah.
And then I wanted to highlight these twists right here because they've broken away. Marina initiates them and she uses her hips more. Like you can see right there, she really swishes back and forth with her hips. Whereas Pavel doesn't use his hips quite as much, especially on that second twist. But they're both doing the same movement and it has a slightly different look on either of them because of how they're choosing to actually do that movement.
Mm-hmm. And like he uses his hips a little bit on that first one, but the way that she does it, it's quite flowy.
Mm-hmm.
Kate said, why would it be awkward for a man to do it if it was the exact same movement? If it's more feminine movement, shouldn't he be able to do the exact same thing and have it be okay?
Oh, yes. I 100% agree. I don't know Pavel, but he, to me, is a very masculine dancer.
Mm-hmm.
And that feminine movement doesn't seem to match with his brand, as it were.
Yeah.
Yeah, I 100% agree that anybody can do any sort of movement that they so choose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's just a certain energy that certain, different people have. And like if you're to choose to do, the opposite of what you typically do, it can feel a little unnatural or look a little unnatural on them.
Mm-hmm.
Even though like the movement in and of itself is totally fine, it's more just like for them, it looks out of place.
Yeah. And that's something to consider as you're growing in your own dancing is what is, for lack of a better word, your brand as an individual, because you start to build up a set of expectations that your audience has for your dancing.
Right.
And if you start leaving out signature things of yours and replacing them with things that are completely antithesis to what you're used to, even though it could look fine, just because it's such a sharp contrast to what's expected of you, it can look and feel jarring.
Right. Like a great example would be Larissa. Like she's very, very feminine in her movement. So if she were to suddenly add in something that was like overtly masculine, it wouldn't be like awkward, but it would just be like, oh, that seems weird for her. That's not something that she usually does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's less about, when I said the word awkward, I didn't mean judging it negatively. I just meant it would stand in contrast to what his normal is. And that kind of uncanny juxtaposition can feel awkward to the viewer. Yeah.
Kate said, I was assuming he was following and did the same move, not leading, doing the same move. It makes sense. It would be awkward as a lead being that feminine.
Gotcha. Yeah. And we're actually, our next two videos, the first one we're going to talk about is of Dillon Luther and Tim Kenny. And then the next one is going to be Sam Buckwalter and Jen Deluca. So we're going to be talking about masculine, feminine movements on different genders as well. We just wanted to start with this video because Pavel is so classically masculine and Marina is so classically feminine, and that contrast is really clear when you watch this video, and it helps preface what we're going to be talking about in the next two videos. Also, just the way she preps this with her thighs close together, it is a very feminine thing. So just the way she preps it.
It creates a nice curve look in her leg.
Yeah. Whereas you can see that Pavel is already rotating to the right before he has actually placed that foot on the ground, which is making it a little bit more of a masculine effect.
Yeah, he also breaks at the ankle. So Marina has one long fluid line as she goes into it, right? So that front foot comes into a point. As he goes into it, it's a flexed foot, which has that break, and that break is more masculine. Like there's a slight point to it, but not nearly as much, and it doesn't have a flow to it up the rest of the leg.
Yeah, it's more of a relaxed point. Next. This leg flick of Marina. First of all, gorgeous.
Mm-hmm.
But it very much follows through with her hips. So if we back up a little bit, she's bending her right knee and lifting it, and her hips are tipped to the side. But then the movement finishes as she extends her leg in that rotation to the right on her standing leg and settling into that hip. You'll want to keep this in mind when we go to the next video, because Tim Kenny starts his dance with Dillon with a leg flick, but it's danced in a much more masculine way, and we'll talk about that when we get to it. So right here, I just wanted to talk about Pavel's side together side. It's very down into the knees.
Yeah.
And very, very sportsmanlike.
Mm-hmm.
And for lack of a better word, kind of like just rougher around the edges, and that grittiness down into the knees feels more masculine.
Right. There's not a softening to the angles.
Yeah.
Apart from the softening that happens just because of the fall of his pants, but it's not because of the way that he has his legs. And typically, not all the time, but a lot of times, to see the more like feminine version of this, there's going to be a straight back leg involved.
Yeah, so instead of a broken leg that he's leaving, it'd be straighter.
Yeah. Which would mean he would have to not be quite as dropped into the floor, or take larger steps.
Yep.
So.
And then I also wanted to highlight this kickball change of Pavel's, because it's just excellent swing technique, the way he's pulsing it. But his pulsing is very classic, like Lindy swing, and it's down into the ground.
Yeah.
And energy that goes down into the ground a little bit more aggressively feels masculine, whereas something that's more emphasis on the up and the stretch can feel more feminine.
Yeah.
And then also, like, after the kick ball, before he does the change, his back foot flicks up again with that relaxed ankle instead of a point, and that's another masculine element.
Yeah. And there's not any extra circular movement to it, which would make it look a little bit more like the flick that Marina did, which was very circular and flowy.
Dillon and Tim in the chat, go ahead and give it a watch. Love this dance. To the screen share. Right off the bat, we've got Tim's flick. So if we think back to Marina's, it finished very much in the hips. But for Tim, he's keeping it mostly from the hip joint down, and he's not actually moving his pelvis through it. He's also keeping a more relaxed ankle, not as strong of a point. And that combination of having a slightly more relaxed ankle and keeping it more solely in the leg makes this movement much more masculine.
Yeah, Tim in general has a very interesting way, like he keeps things rather neutral in like terms of feminine, masculine. Like it doesn't tend to swing one way or the other too much. It tends to be like something that maybe could be feminine that has elements of masculinity that, you know, just kind of neutralizes it a little bit.
So then we're looking at Tim's boogie walks here, which the way he styles them is, like Alicia was saying, is a more neutralized version, because he's not getting so low that it becomes masculine, but he's not so high up and using his hips that it feels feminine. It's like a really nice cross in between the two.
Yeah, and he does use the hips, but it's not to accentuate anything. It's more functional.
Yeah.
Like a lot of times, if you would look at boogie walks that are a little bit more feminine, there is a like accentuation of the hip movement.
Mm-hmm.
And it becomes more than just being functional.
Yeah.
But I also love that he kind of has, I would say it's maybe a little bit more on the feminine side. But then if you look up at his hand, it kind of matches that. It's
Mm-hmm.
a little bit more on the feminine side because he doesn't have one solid hand. Like, it's not in a fist. It's not completely open. There's a little bit of a draping to it.
Yeah. Looking at Dillon. So he tends to use really strong chest rolls and chest pops in his styling, which, if you're getting really technical about it, the use of strong chest muscles is just a masculine kind of movement to the body. But would you agree, Alicia, that popping and locking, while people of all genders, and it can be both masculine and feminine, those hard staccato movements tend to be more masculine than feminine?
Yeah, they do. And a lot of that is because of the way that you go about doing that, because there has to be a very strong muscle activation with it. And that is something that creates a very masculine look, no matter like what way you go about it. Like, you have to have that muscle activation, and that creates a stronger look.
Yep. Talking about Tim's free arm first. The way he lets his free arm extend behind him as he connects through this anchor is a very feminine styling, in so much as that it's kind of just classic follow technique in a West Coast swing, and having an extended arm and having that extended line. And this contra right here. So you can see how his right shoulder is forward, his right hip is back.
Yeah.
And that contra into this line is just a more feminine image.
And the other thing I'll say about it is that if you watch from the hand being up above the head to it falling back, there's an arc to it, like a rainbow to it. And that's something that is more feminine, that smooth slope.
Yeah.
And even though he does have a bend to that arm, it doesn't affect it too terribly much. It makes it a little bit more masculine, but not too terribly much, just because of the flow of the movement. And I will say that the shape of the hand also affects it a little bit. Right, he has a snap, which it has that, it's not one movement, it's not one whole unit, until he kind of brings it back further. And opening into that C shape is very feminine.
And if we look at Dillon really quick, he does a little bit of a moonwalking action just for that first strafe right here. He has more stiffness to his legs. There's a little bit less flow. And again, that's not a bad thing. It just has a more masculine effect to it.
Right. And Dillon tends to not add too much hip movement into anything that he does, which creates sharper angles in general.
Yep. So this 3 and 4 redirect that Dillon does is very powerful and has a sharp contrast in timing. Like, he really shoots Tim away from him and rides that energy. And the strength and power to that lead gives a very masculine effect to the way it looks. And then he also has that ronde, but again, he's not overly pointing his foot, which is helping it feel a little bit more masculine.
He's doing enough. So you can point the foot from the ankle or from the toes. And if you want a very feminine look, you do both. but Dillon's doing a very good job of keeping it a little bit more masculine looking, and he's doing that by not completing it. So he's pointing with the ankle, but not the toes.
Yeah.
Which keeps it, it gives that straight flowing line, but it doesn't make it overly feminine. There's not like a curl to the end of it.
Mm-hmm. So this is a really good example of them both styling their anchors in different ways. So Tim's is very feminine, whereas Dillon's is very masculine.
I would say Tim's is very feminine for him.
Yes. But also in the footwork, because the way he lets his right foot and his hips sink away from Dillon and looks away.
Yeah.
That footwork tends to be just in general a feminine footwork for West Coast swing.
Yeah. And he is keeping it a little bit less overly feminine by keeping that really strong bend in the knee. So even though he's allowing the hips to kind of go with it and there's some shaping to it, right? It's not overly feminine because there is still some of those harsh angles involved.
Mm-hmm. Whereas if we look at Dillon, and this is actually another interesting thing to note, is that how far apart your legs are can also indicate masculine versus feminine. So if we look at Tim, his thighs are close together. That tends to be more feminine. Whereas a very wide stance, a very strong grounded stance tends to be more masculine. So Dillon taking a very strong step to the side and then dragging in slowly, has a more masculine effect to it.
Yeah, I would definitely say that like both ends of the connection here have a very solid mix of masculine and feminine. Neither of them are like skewed completely one way or the other way. They both have a very good mix of it. Like Dillon has some nice lines happening and some kind of arcing in that left side of the body that's making it a little bit more feminine on him. It's not feminine in general, but
I drew an arc, but I was not holding shift. I swear. There we go. What's nice is they're actually parallel arcs, which I just really appreciate because as a partnership, that looks really nice together. Which is a separate topic, but I thought I'd throw it in there.
Yeah. And then you can really see with Dillon the way, like that large step that he takes, plus the fact that he has his elbow at an angle and drawn back is what's keeping that sharpness to it. And really balancing out the masculine and feminine.
Whereas Tim is over here. That. I love this section and just in general how they dance the breaks together in this dance, because they tend to play off of each other and mix up softness with more strength and staccato movement and power.
Yeah, this in particular, it's very interesting. It's very masculine based on the stances that they take with it, but then the dissipating movement out of it is very feminine. Because there's that roll, the arcing.
Yeah, so if we look at this first hit, Dillon hits it a little bit harder. Tim hit it a little bit softer. And then Dillon does the rolling. Tim starts rolling. And then the way Tim goes into the next hit, where he really picks up his foot, anticipates backwards, and then stomps it, has a much more masculine effect than his previous hit. And just having those two juxtaposed together, and then like you said, the way he dissipates it afterwards is a really fun combination of them playing with the different effects.
And I would add in that lean back hesitation that he has, that Tim does, it is more masculine because there is not a flow around the end of it. So he leans back and then it just hesitates and comes back forward, rather than him leaning back, it kind of dissipating and then him coming back forward. That creates more of like an arced movement rather than this, which is just kind of back and forward, which is a little bit sharper.
Mm-hmm. I really appreciate that he also anticipates his chin. So like he's tucked his chin in right here to give even more strength right here when he brings his head forward a little bit. So this is like a similar point in the music where it's repetitive to what we've just watched in the previous section. And it's a very similar, like you can even see this is like Tim's almost same prep right here, just with more of a delayed weight transfer.
Yeah.
For bringing it up over top. But then this time he collects his feet, and that collecting of the feet is more feminine. And his turnout is divine. I will say that.
Yeah.
Lovely.
And the way that he does collect the feet creates some softer shapes within the legs. You can collect the feet and have it look very sharp. But because of the turnout at the ankle, he is attaching that inside of the ankle to the back of the heel. It gives that like swooping feeling up from the toe to the knee. And then he's not, his hips are a little bit more even. So it's not adding any extra sharpness to that bent leg. If he dropped that hip more, it would give a lot more of an angle to the knee. And so we wouldn't see quite as much of a flowing movement from the toe up to the hip.
All right, I love this section. The way Tim is snapping out and down tends to just be classically like a very masculine jazz movement. Like you think West Side Story when you think snapping out and down. And then also on the other side, Dillon is doing shrugs downward, which also, like we were talking about with Marina and Pavel, downward action with the emphasis on the down tends to be more masculine.
Yeah, I love what Tim chose to do with it because, I mean, I've followed that quite a few times from Dillon, and it does give a very like arced momentum. So it's very easy to go on the feminine side with it. But because of the angles that he's like really retaining with his body, it looks less so. That kind of like dip where he looks like he's hanging off of Dillon's side of the body, like it adds that feminine to it just because it's kind of like that arcing, like dripping, you know, downward. But because of the different angles that he has within the body, it looks less so. It's very even.
Yeah. And would you agree that if, all right, so he's facing away from us and his head is kind of pointed that way. If he were to have continued this arc with his head and been looking that way down at the ground, that would have made it look more feminine.
Yeah, because that head really adds an extra angle to it.
Yeah. Head weight, people. It has so much more effect than we want to think about.
Right.
But where you're looking matters. So I just wanted to talk about Dillon's 2 right here, because he takes a really large side step and he plies down to create that. And then he collects and drags, but he finishes without fully collecting his feet.
Yeah.
And that can have a more masculine look to it.
And I would say that as he is taking that wide step, he has a very flexed foot.
Yeah. Which functionally is also quite necessary. Like, I think you could pull that off with a toe lead.
You could. It has to be done a very specific way.
Yeah.
And I believe because he's the one leading that, it's more necessary to have that break.
Yeah. So right here, just wanted to talk about Tim's walk into his anchor. And this is just a different angle of the one that we looked at earlier with the parallel arcs through both of their bodies. But it can just be helpful to see that from a different perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing I'll point out here is that the hand shape that Tim has, it is more masculine. It's like in a fist more than it has been previously. He's had more of like a snapped position with like that C shape of the fingers, but he comes right here into like a full like fist as he's kind of dragging it through.
Yeah. And I love the way how he looks down right here, because then the way it follows through with his head coming up as he finishes that weight transfer, and he lets it lilt to the side a little bit.
Yeah.
Just has such a lovely arc to it.
Yep.
One more. The dip of death. So remember how earlier when Pavel dipped Marina, he did that sharp head turn to look at her. Whereas this time, Tim is the one who's using a sharp head turn to look at the audience. Right there. Bam. The crowd goes wild.
Mm-hmm.
and then Dillon turns into Yakub.
And is like, let's see if you can bend this way.
And Tim's like, we'll see. We'll see. We'll see. Hey, look, we did it. And next week, we're actually going to be talking about dancing your non-dominant role. So very specifically, like the technique of dancing in the role that isn't your main one. And one of the things that I really like about the way Tim follows this dip is that he isn't trying to be feminine. He makes it stronger. Yeah. He makes the hit harder. He has a pointed foot, but he's not pointing the toes. It's just from the ankle. And he's really reaching out to engage the audience as opposed to like trying to pull the audience into him. Because sometimes it can be like, and this is like the uncanny, not that there's anything wrong with it. It's just because of certain sets of expectations that this dance has socialized us to expect. Seeing a man dip another man can have that element of the uncanny to it. And what I appreciate about this is it often happens that two men dancing together turn it into camp. And it's about the gag, which, there's a place for that. And I do appreciate that. However, this is still a really amazing dip. Yeah. But it doesn't feel uncanny or awkward because of the way they're dancing it. And it still fits and it works.
Yeah. And I'll add into that one thing that Tim is doing to make it a little bit more masculine is he has that leg up off the floor the whole time. So it's creating a very sharp, like L angle in his body that he's kind of then like leaning back a little bit with the upper body, but he's leaving that leg straight off the floor. If he were to have the toe touching the floor and have more of a sloped angle upward, you would have a more feminine like movement to it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. All right, next video. Sam and Jen. In theory, the link will send you to the second song. Highly recommend watching the first song later, but we're just going to deal with the second song right now. To the screen share. So one of the things that I find really interesting about watching Sam and Jen in particular is Sam has a very distinct lead and a very distinct follow. Like it's almost like she's Superman running into the telephone booth and putting on her outfit when she transitions roles. Like she dances each role differently. It's like she becomes a different person. But you know what I'm saying. Whereas Jen is Jen no matter what role she's dancing. Even though she's dancing technique-wise, both roles distinctly and correctly. But she's still Jen, whereas Sam has a slightly different flavor to her. Yeah. Depending on which role she has, even though she transitions people. Anyways. Onward and upward.
I think part of it with Sam is that she has quite a different look when she's moving backwards and moving forwards. And I don't think Jen does quite as much.
Right, because what I see it as being is, in general, Sam tends to be much more down and back into her heels when she leads, but she's very forward on her toes when she follows. Whereas Jen just grounds through her feet the same way the whole time. Anyways, onwards to specifics. If we start looking at the hips situation, through this anchor, Sam has a much lower sweep with a gentler point, wider stance, whereas Jen's is much tighter, closer together, and has more movement through her hips. I also love how right through here, like Jen really collects her thighs and draws her right foot out in front. So she makes an L on the floor as opposed to a diagonal line.
Yeah, and I also will add in that Jen, her hand is something that, like her free hand is something that really adds to like the femininity of what she does.
Yeah, and there's a sequence towards the end of this dance where her arm styling is just so on point, and we're gonna get into that.
Yeah, because you see that like fan of the fingers that she has at the moment. It's very swooping and soft. And it just like transitions her arm into something far more feminine. Even though she's not really doing anything different to it other than just kind of releasing the fingers.
So now they have swapped roles. Don't get confused. This can get dizzying. But Sam is now much more forward on her toes, and she uses her hips in much more contra body when she's following. So you can see how here on this one, her left hip is up and back. And then right here, when she's getting prepped, her right hip comes back and up even more than on her one. And she doesn't do that when she's leading to the same degree. And then also, I just wanted to highlight, so Jen is leading this prep incredibly well. That being said, it has a more feminine edge to it because her chest is turned slightly to the right consistently, projecting towards Sam. Whereas to create a masculine 2, all you'd have to do is rotate to your left as a leader and do a resisted release of your right shoulder here. So Jen at this point would be actually facing the vertical Portland sign in the background. And by moving into that shape, it would have a more masculine look to it.
Yeah. And also the way that her arm moves back to front, like from behind her body to in front of it, it's very flowy. Like it's still effective. It's doing the exact same thing as a more masculine prep would, but it's just there's a more flow to it.
Yeah. All right, so I wanted to talk about this, these hip catches, especially once they get here in the close position and they kind of go back and forth together. The way Jen dances it tends to originate from her hips and wave up through her spine. Whereas Sam's more of like a tree in the breeze, and her hips are staying much more sturdy, and she's just kind of tipping over the top of them. And so thinking about where movement that starts at one point in the body and moves to affect the rest of the body in a chain of cause and effect, where a movement originates can have a different effect. So because it's originating from Jen's hips, it ends up being more feminine. But because Sam is a little bit more upper body focused, that feels slightly more masculine.
Yeah.
All right. Then I love this push break. So this there's a lot of sneaky things going on. Jen starts by leading a push break, but she bends forward and brings her arms towards each other. Her elbows are really close to her rib cage, and she has that very feminine free hand.
Yes.
And so, like, yes, she's leading, but she's being very feminine in her lead. And then I think that's part of what cues Sam to take the lead from her. So Jen led this 4. She initiated it. But then Sam, from this point on, is leading.
Mm-hmm.
And so Jen is able to continue her very feminine styling that she was originating from her lead and transition it into her follow seamlessly.
Yeah.
And it's divine.
Jen has so much extra hip movement with her lead.
Yep. Yeah, this whole video is just a masterclass in role switching, so highly recommend watching the whole video at some point. And then now we're going into arm styling galore for Jen. And it's just this entire sequence of just super feminine arm styling, like running her fingers through her hair, elbows really tight in front of her.
Yep.
That break of the wrist that she follows through on as she brings here. And then this draping across her chest and extension afterwards. And then my favorite, the way she followed through here. But then after she finishes this rotation, the way she does her, which arm is it? Yeah, she runs her fingers through her hair, but she shrugs her shoulder. She pulls her right hand down Sam's arm and then preps open. Just the whole sequence is just a master class in feminine arm styling.
Mm-hmm.
And I love it so much. I'm going to go through it one more time.
It's a lot of draping, a lot of soft angles, a lot of follow through. I think that's something that Jen does more than a lot of other follows, is that she adds in a lot of feminine arm styling.
Yeah.
But it's never like the same thing. There's a lot of variation to it, which is, I think, what makes it unique. You see a lot of follows that, do something very feminine with their arms, but it's always very similar.
Yeah.
Jen always just kind of lets it like flow, and like whatever she feels like doing, she kind of goes with it.
Yep. So I wanted to talk about how Jen steals the lead here, because it's a combination of just functionally what she's doing is taking control of the connection, but also visually, like, so she's starting out with this flick of her back leg.
Yeah.
But because she goes into a really wide partial plie afterwards and just leans from her hips, it ends up having a much more masculine effect to it. And that can be one of those, if you get to the point where you dance both roles and you enjoy switching with someone else, it can be a really subtle way of trading off lead and follow, is by playing off of what movements look masculine versus feminine. And if you were to suddenly, for instance, be doing more feminine movement, and then just suddenly transition to a more masculine looking movement, that's a cue to your partner that, you might be wanting to take the lead. It actually, I've never really thought of it that way, but I think that's one of the things that Phoenix and I are really good at when we have switch dances together, because we have those really subtle cues that are visual. And funny story, he messaged me today and said it's our 10-year Facebook anniversary. And I'm just like, holy crap. I sent him a gif of like the bad guy from the third Indiana Jones movie becoming very old very quickly. And then if we watch Sam through that transition as well, because like Jen is going from feminine to masculine, whereas Sam is going from very masculine here with this wide stance to realizing, oh, I'm following now. Okay. Back to very feminine, feet close together, more hip movement, more flow to her arms.
Yeah.
And then lastly, I wanted to talk about these skips here at the end. Because Jen has a very down emphasis to hers, like she's strutting, and that has a more confident masculine look to it. Whereas Jen's like whereas Sam's on the yellow brick road, she's like very up and bouncy, and that I'm not sure if that's necessarily feminine. It just has a lighter air to it, and in contrast to what Jen's doing, ends up looking feminine just because Jen's is so masculine. It's like the difference between bouncing up to then go down versus bouncing up because you're bouncing up. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense to me.
Cool. But that's one of those things that, like, if you don't know how to physically make that happen in your body, the difference between these two, it might not make any sense to you. So one thing I will add, and we'll probably talk a lot more about this next week, is something that a compliment that I used to receive a lot when I first started competing as a leader, which I took as a compliment because it was, but it always just seemed such a weird way to compliment someone. And it was, I love your leading because you don't look like a girl when you're leading. And I have since come to understand what that actually means. It has nothing to do with masculine and feminine, although that can be a part of it. It is not the whole story. It ends up being more like, do I understand the timing order of operations of the function of West Coast Swing Connection? Because women who lead, who look like women leading, are still behind the rhythm of the music because that's what they've been entrained into their bodies as a follow in West Coast Swing. Whereas a leader, you need to be ahead of the music in order for the follow to be on time.
Yeah.
That's like the main thing. Man, I could rant about that for hours.
I think there's also quite a difference in how, what word am I looking for? Like how prominent you are in your positioning, and like, are you more wide? Are you more open? And like, how much space are you taking up? Because I think a lot of women that will lead tend to, be more in and not take up as much space because that's just how they are. Fine.
That's another good point.
It's not easy to follow. There's not enough substance behind it a lot of times. Those are my 2 cents.
What's going to be really interesting. So next week, our topic is dancing your non-dominant role. So we're going to get more into like the technique differences between those two things. And then the following week, on a different day than normal, not Thursday, we're having our tall follow panel with Tim Kenny, Phoenix Gray, Michelle Crozier, Tessa Antolini,
and Bryn Anderson.
Jeez. I feel someone should hate me for dropping all those names, but no, they all volunteered. They're all very excited. We're going to rant about being tall follows.
And I'll listen.
And how annoying that can be. If you want to live vicariously through taller people, come join. If you want to know how to dance with taller people, come join. If you are tall and you want to commiserate, come join.
Basically, just come join.
It's going to be great. And it'll probably be a Facebook Live when it's live instead of a Zoom meeting because it's mostly going to be talking heads. So we thought that would be easier. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us. We'll be back next week. Computer.
Oh, that just echoed.
It did. Has it stopped?
Just play that. It's okay. You can just make the noise. It's fine.
It'll help bring you back to life. I'll do it for you.
My neighbor is just apparently deciding to be very loud tonight. First, it was time to take a bath. Now it's time to walk around and be very squeaky.
Good times. Good times. Patrick shared a thing on Facebook today. It's like, does everyone else oscillate between joy at watching a dance video and extreme pain that you're not dancing? I'm like, yeah, that's me. Every second. Oh man, I just realized I have to do the transition again to the screen share. Slowly reviving you one doodly-doo at a time. All right, so right off the bat, I can words. Are your neighbors pouring more water? Because it got louder.
Yeah.
Okay, good times. I just realized his number 626, my favorite Disney alien. I am so happy right now. For those of you who don't know, that's Stitch from Lilo and Stitch. Anyways.
I don't think I've ever described it that way before, but
it works.
Yep.
It's an accurate description. It's one of the, oh man, pointing from the toes. It's like, I wish Supa sandals came in more sizes because every time I go to point my toes in my Supas, the sole of my shoe also goes forward and then past my toes. And it's like my toes suddenly have a tongue. And it's not a good look. Anyways. Oh, geez. Why is my computer having a small aneurysm? Okay, there we go. We're back.
I can literally hear her splashing around in her tub right now.
Is that a pun? Did I just pun? I apologize if anyone present hates puns. They sometimes just come out of me. Usually I'm proud, but I'm like, oh, that one was bad.
Love how it starts with them like petting each other's face.
What movement looks masculine, which versus which? Wow, that's a hard sentence for some reason.